Welcome to Rising Woman Leaders, a safe space for women to thrive in community where their voices and stories are heard. We're a sisterhood supporting each other to live our dreams and embody the sacred feminine to restore balance on our planet. Join us each week as we return to the unconditional love and guidance of our heart and our womb. I'm your host, Meredith Ram, and I invite you to walk this path of beauty, devotion, and service with us. The Rising Woman Leaders Priestess Initiation Program is now open for enrollment and spaces are already filling up. This is a feminine leadership initiation, a high priestess sisterhood, and women's circle facilitator training program. It's 10 months long, held online. Join us on a path of devotion, beauty, and service as we go through a series of initiation gateways to claim your role as a priestess. We'll join together to reveal a deeper meaning of existence and anchor into our living as an embodiment of love to serve our planet and future generations. We'll be exploring themes of femininity, devotion, wildness, compassion, boundaries, prosperity, service, love, vision, and leadership. Some highlights of the course curriculum includes having 7 private healing sessions with me, where we can look at womb healing, leadership skills, how to step more fully into your dreams, your goals through mentorship. We'll have group calls every month and training modules where we'll explore energetic clearing, the wheel of the year, astrological foundations, womb healing, forgiveness, stepping into the beauty way, creating a temple of your body, your home, fertility, sensuality, love, intimacy, creating a daily sadhana practice, deepening your connection with the dream world, the power of prayer, healing your relationship to money, opening up to receive more deeply, feminine abundance and magnetism. We'll be stepping into the themes of sacred mission and activating your voice, refining your contribution in the world, as well as learning how to facilitate women's circles. We'll have time for exploring release and renewal, creativity, stepping into your soul essence, and writing your vows to claim your role as a priestess. All the details are up at risingwomanleaders.com. More info on our website. I'm here today with Kit Maloney. For 20 years, she has been an activist, an academic, and an entrepreneur committed to channeling her passion for gender equity into a celebration of women and yoni-bodied folks' embodied health and healing. She's earned a master's degree in gender and social policy from the London School of Economics and has been featured widely in the media, including Glamour, Self, and Bustle. She's also the founder of Oh Actually and the Pleasure Pledge, 2 ventures honoring female sexual pleasure for safety, healing, and empowerment. And Marie Claire named her an amazing woman for her works about celebrating women's sexuality. And thank you for being here, Kit.
Meredith, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, so we were just chatting before starting our recording. We met maybe 8 years ago, 7 years ago. I was definitely more at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey as a coach, and we were at this incredible retreat with, I think, 100 women and really diving into the entrepreneurial ideas of just like, what are our businesses going to look like? And anything you want to just reflect on when you think back to who you were then, who you are now, anything that stands out?
It's fun to remember and to feel into that version of Kit. So sweet, so hopeful, and really inspired by what can happen when women connect to their bodies. And at the time, I was very rooted in the power of our sexuality and our orgasm. And I still so am. That journey has led me along the way to further connect with my intuition and creativity and birth new creations in the world. And so in many ways, I've journeyed along that route to create this new venture, Katara, which is about Yoni Steaming. And yet those foundational practices are woven into everything that I do and am about. And so, yeah, connecting to that 2014 Kit is actually really special. I feel her energy and her excitement in my body right now. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we as women, I see us as this vessel of creativity. And it was really inspiring to meet so many women who were taking those courageous steps and starting their businesses and allowing them to be these creative ventures. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could start by telling us just a little bit about Kitara and the journey of starting that business and what it's all about. Love to hear.
Thank you. And you're so right. And it's so joyful to name that women are not only finding ourselves called to this really courageous, beautiful, profound work in the world and putting what we make out there, but also really feeling into how, into our process and allowing how we do what we do to be connected to the body. And that really has become so relevant with my work with Katara, which is a venture that is primarily based right now in providing beautifully designed and expertly crafted products and services to make in-home vaginal or yoni steaming really as accessible as possible throughout the country and the world. But why we do that is so that we are offering women and yoni-bodied folks that much more intimacy with the body so that we may heal and so that we may come into a deepened awareness that the messages of the body have for us so that they can be in really the driver's seat of our creations and really leading us into living in a way that is regenerative and that is therefore recycling and up-leveling our energy rather than depleting it from us. And I found that the body, even though my own journey absolutely is very much one about annexing the body for years and years and years and living in the head, very actually at times intentionally, even if sometimes also absolutely unconsciously, but then seeing the ways in which I could no longer go on that way. That was not only not sustainable, it was quite literally shutting me down and shutting down my voice. My thyroid stopped working, which is actually a really common experience in a lot of women. And for me, it is such an obvious metaphor of what happens to us when we disconnect from the body. Our neck is that conduit. And it is shut down. It can't function if we're no longer listening to what's coming from the body. And for us as women and yoni-bodied people, those messages are often foundationally put in the womb space. And so when we connect into that energy, we're connecting into our cycles as bleeding people. And so yoni steaming is a way in which that we come into that deepened intimacy and can hear these different messages about how we might want to live in the world. I myself was on this journey really focused with this company, or actually in the Pleasure Pledge, around orgasm and around the healing powers of orgasmic energy. And I was at this great workshop about female ejaculation. And I say these things to really note how much I was down the whole rabbit hole of releasing taboo around all sorts of things. And yet I was at this workshop and people were talking about yoni steaming. And I was so skeptical. I drove home like an hour away and was just like in my head of like, what were they talking about? What is this thing? Like, I'm not sure that that's a good thing to do. And I just realized that that was a voice of fear and judgment, and that it was not in the flavor that my soul speaks. And that actually, if I allowed that voice some safe respite underneath, I was really curious. And so with that curiosity, I set up a Yoni Steam with a wonderful practitioner, and had this incredible experience of realizing that this modality carries with it such gentleness and yet such force. And that is so representative in my relationship, at least with the divine feminine energy itself. And so I came to fall in love with the practice. I really sought it out for myself, really as a spiritual connection. And then it gave me all these incredible physical benefits. And so I wanted all the things, and I went out to buy all the things, and I didn't find the things. So with Katara, I created a brand so that other folks on their journey, should they choose to want to buy the supportive aspects of Yoni Steaming at home, they could have really well-made, beautiful products to support that.
Mm-hmm. So beautiful. And maybe we can just describe what is Yoni Steaming, in case there is anyone out there who's like brand new to this.
Yes, thank you. So at its core, Yoni Steaming is heating up some water to a safe temperature where it's warm and gentle and soothing, to hover your hand over it. And then you position yourself so that your yoni has access to receive the steam. So this can work in a number of different ways. You can heat up a pot of water on the stove top and then put it on the ground on a mat so that you keep your floor safe. And if you're able-bodied, you can be in a child's pose. If you're doing this, I recommend putting a towel around the rim of your pot of water so that if you do happen to sort of lower down and touch that pot, you're touching the towel and not a hot pot. But in its essence, that is what it is. It's hovering over heated water. As we get a little bit more complicated, there are seats and stools, which of course Katara makes to support this so that it's that much safer and easier. And therefore, I believe more likely that you're going to do it. And also there are a variety of different herbs that people can use to be supportive of the practice and the specific ailments that they might be steaming for. So I like to say that in this metaphor with yoga, we can do yoga anywhere, right? It's really about connecting to the breath, and we can do asana anywhere. But it's really nice to have a yoga mat. It adds a sense of ritual and safety to the experience. And in steaming, that's the vaginal steam seat. So hope that makes sense.
Wow. Can you describe a little bit of your before and after journey with Yoni Steaming? What was your relationship to your moon, your cycle, to your womb, and what shifted?
Yeah, thank you. So I had this first experience where I just, on that deeper level, I felt the power of gentleness. And so I have done a lot of work at that point with healing my wounded feminine through connection to the divine feminine. And yet I felt the embodiment of that in a deeper way. And I felt some emotional release and unlockages. So I had a really emotional experience at my first Yoni Steam with a release of tears. And you know, when you just feel things softening along your spine, that was an aspect of that first journey for me as well. And then as I continued to steam, a couple of things unlocked for me. One, this connection to what day of my cycle I was on. At that point, when I started steaming, I was aware of the 4 different phases, which I was, here I am. I have a master's in gender and social policy that I got in my 20s. And it wasn't until about 10 years later that I actually could really talk to you about the 4 different phases of woman's cycle. So that information, regardless of your age, if you don't know about follicular, ovulation, luteal, or menstruation, there's now so much more wonderful information out on social media and the web, but permission to dive in and not feel any sort of shame around not yet knowing those aspects of the cycle. For me, I was starting to play with that, starting to have reverence for each of those phases through making different choices around my food and movement and sexual practices. But with steaming, it helped me deepen even further into what day I was on, because it is not safe to steam on certain days of your cycle, including when you're bleeding. And pretty much that's one of the only times that you can't steam in terms of days of your cycle. But it really allowed me to count and to track my cycle so that I knew when was best for me to steam. Lots of people, including myself, don't want to steam actually the days immediately before your bleed. They want to steam about 3 days before you're going to bleed. And so again, it invites you into that intimacy, that tracking, what's happening in my body, how am I feeling? And I grew up thinking that, my period was fine, telling doctors that I had some period pain and probably had to take 2 to 3 Advil every 2 to 3 months. I was told that was super normal, even lucky. And I was also told that the brown blood, of which I had a fairly significant amount before and after my bleed, a day or two, at least on each side, that was also completely normal. And it wasn't until steaming that I came to understand that might be normal, but a lot of really messed up stuff is normal in our culture. Common, incredibly common. But that when it comes to what's really optimal for our bodies, these are not so. We are not meant to experience any pain, let alone pain that is going to evoke the need for painkillers. Or keep us in bed or keep us away from gentle activities throughout the day. And that brown blood is associated with the pain. It is stagnated blood. It is blood that has been there from previous cycles. And that's why it's brown. It's been oxidized. And so the steam is working to help the natural cleanse of the uterus. And by helping that natural cleanse, you're removing the stagnation. And so I now bleed with absolutely no pain and start and finish on fresh red blood. And again, those things are connected, because when you have that prevalence of dark blood, it means that the uterus is likely going to do her job and use her primary tool, which is cramping. And so we demonize that in our culture, but actually that's her gift to us. That's her way of helping us remove the stagnation. But with steaming, we can support her so that she doesn't need to use that tool quite as strongly or as robustly or even not at all, so that she can bleed and cleanse on her own without the pain.
Wow. I love that reframe. That is so helpful. Yeah, this is something that I've had as well. It's something that also years ago I talked to doctors about, and they're like, yeah, should be fine. Nothing we can do. And yeah, so I'd love to hear even more details of just the best, if there are people out there struggling with that, the stagnation and the brown blood, what phases of the cycle would be best to steam? What herbs? How often? All of those.
Okay, great. Yeah. I love it. So really great days to steam pretty much for everyone is going to be the 3 days immediately after you stop bleeding. So as I referenced, you don't want to steam while you're bleeding fresh red blood. Your uterine arteries are open. The body is sending blood into the uterus to help with that cleanse. It's doing its job, and we don't need to accelerate that. And there can be some risk that you might bleed too much if you're trying to accelerate that bleed during that time. So that's why you don't want to steam while you're bleeding fresh red blood. Once your bleed has stopped, however, steaming is a great thing to do for 1 to 3 days in a row. And again, that helps support the cleanse. If there's anything left over in the uterus that wasn't able to be released, it can be supported in its release through the steaming. And then you're likely going to want to steam for 1 to 3 days before you start your bleed. What I mentioned earlier is that for some folks, they're not going to want to steam on the days immediately before their bleed. And this, again, is when we can really get into this beautiful practice of understanding the length of our cycles. For those who have cycles that are under 27 days, those are on the shorter side. And there's usually an element of uterine fatigue happening. Really understandable. We are getting into having bled for decades once we're in our mid-30s, early 40s, and there's some understandable fatigue, and particularly in the culture and stress that we live in, and how much of that we tend to store in the space of the body. But because of that, we don't want to further shorten our cycle by steaming too much before the bleed. So let's say you have a 24-day cycle. I would recommend steaming on days 19, 20, and 21, and then waiting a few days and then bleeding. If you have a really strong cycle, 28, 29 days, you might want to steam on days 24, 25, and 26. So it's kind of feeling into that, making sure that the steam before your bleed is preparing the body for its complete cleanse, but not signaling to the body to bleed early, if that makes sense. And then depending on the herbs, those are also usually connected with if you want to support the body to have a longer bleed or to have a shorter bleed. So with Katara, we have some strengthening herbs that I recommend to most people who are experiencing uterine fatigue, so that they can get some of these boosting, strengthening herbs to signal to the body, hang on a little bit longer, like we've got you here, so that you don't bleed too early. And then we have a release blend, which is using particular cleansing herbs for those who have a strong cycle and a lot of stagnation that might be causing people to not bleed for 34, 35 days or longer. Those release cleansing herbs are there to say to the body, okay, actually, we can get things going now. We can get the blood flowing to have that cleanse. And then there are a variety of additional reasons to steam. And so that includes clearing out yeast infections. We have a disinfecting blend that's really great for working with chronic infections and BV. And then we also have a blend for postmenopausal and menopausal women that's called Refresh. And that's a cooling blend that can help cool down the body and release and cleanse the uterus in a way to prepare for when the body goes into no longer having those monthly cleanses. And so that's a little bit about the different herbs. Inevitably, somebody's going to say, but I have short cycles and yeast infections. And so there are always these intersections. And I do have a free quiz for folks on kataralove.com so that they can be directed pretty easily to the right herb blend for them. And I'm always happy to answer questions or do a consultation, of course. But just because I've now dangled that out there, if you are listening and you have yeast infections and short cycles, what I would recommend is steaming to clear out the infection first, which would be about a series of 10 consecutive steams in a row, daily steams. And then once that's cleared, to then move on to the strengthening blend.
Wow. Beautiful. Yeah. And so you do consultations with people too to get more personalized.
Again, this is when I bring up the metaphor of yoga, because as simple as yoga is, it also is such a wonderful thing, particularly at the beginning, to approach a teacher about. So that you can be in the proper alignment, and then you can decide to continue to go to teacher-led classes or supplement your practice at home. It works similarly with steaming. And so I do encourage people to get that foundational knowledge that's right for them and their body, particularly at the beginning, so that they can be empowered and in alignment when they're steaming at home.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And so those days you gave us, those are the optimal times, like 3 days before and after. Yeah. But if you were to steam when you're ovulating or something like that, it's okay still.
Exactly. Yeah. So Some women actually experience cramping around their ovulation, so they love to steam. It softens that experience of ovulation. Lots of women enjoy steaming in relationship to the moon. They want to do a full moon steam or a new moon steam. So long as you're not bleeding, that's completely wonderful, and can really be incorporated into all sorts of magical practices. The consideration that is important, particularly around ovulation, is that if you are in a current window of trying actively to conceive, then you don't want to steam after you have tried for conception until you either are proved to be pregnant or you've bled again. And that's because, again, the steam is there to help everything that's needed to release from the uterus come through. And so in this window, after you try for conception, you don't want things to be released. Yeah. You want to prep the body for its cozy home for that baby. So it's not safe to steam.
Right. And so then for pregnant women, is steaming not recommended, or?
Right. And so then you don't steam during your pregnancy. You focus on getting that babe all those wonderful nutrients and rest and preparing yourself. And then in postpartum time, steaming is an incredibly wonderful and powerful practice that's actually been used ubiquitously around the world, can be traced back to all lands where women knew to steam as postpartum recovery. And so that's safe. I would advise working with a midwife, but that tends to be safe as soon as the uterine arteries are closed. And that happens usually around 48 hours after delivery. And what that means is that there's less blood each day. And when there's less bleeding each day, it means that the body's no longer sending fresh blood into the uterus. It's just clearing out the lochia and the remaining blood from the birth. And so at that point, you can steam to help the body with that clearing. And there's a wonderful study called the 4th Trimester Vaginal Steam Study that talks about the various benefits for that. And again, it's wonderful to work with a practitioner so that you feel really nourished and safe in that time, in that postpartum window. But usually it's advised to steam for 30 to 40 consecutive days to support that full post-delivery release. And then the other thing to mention, because it's just so helpful, is that usually it is safe to steam after 37 weeks of pregnancy. And so if you're working with a steam practitioner, they can guide you to steaming for labor preparation, which is a really beautiful and powerful practice if you're choosing to use it for labor preparation.
Wow. Yeah. Beautiful. And then I'm curious, just on your own healing journey, how long was it until you started to see those shifts, like the cramping and the brown blood?
It felt like it was like instant for me. It was like within 1 second. Yeah.
And you were doing it like a couple days in a row, and
a couple of days in a row, like 3 days before I started bleeding, and then immediately after. And I just couldn't believe it. My partner couldn't either. I mean, it's one of those funny things too. Talk about like intimacy with your cycle. I really had to know what day I was on because I couldn't rely on the lower back pain or the cramping anymore. I had no like signal. So I actually like bled into a couple of pants, like, because I was like, oh my gosh, right. It's day 28. I usually get a cramping signal rather than just starting to bleed. So it can happen that quickly, just in a cycle or two, we can start to see these benefits.
Wow. Yeah. And we'll include the links for the blends and the steam saunas that you are making. I want to hear the story of making the sauna boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to make one more nod to steaming. It is a holistic practice that has a lot of sibling practices. And so I think this is really important. You know, when you start to steam, you also are likely to feel into that reverence of the bleeding time. And when we use proper period care, we're also going to be able to see the results faster. So resting during the bleeding time is going to help with that cleanse, eating really nourishing foods, warm foods, so that the body can really release what it's needed to release. These are all really, really supportive practices. And I'm just going to make a quick plug against tampons. because even though I do like to kind of tease that this could put me out of business, but if we all stop using tampons, we're going to have a lot less stagnation. So tampons are so helpful for stopping blood, which is why they work really well when my nieces get nosebleeds. But they do not work very well when you're really trying to support the natural cleansing of the uterus. They're creating blockages and stagnation. And so with all of those things in mind, the proper period care and the steaming, I really do believe that the vast majority of us can see these results in just a couple of cycles.
Wow.
Thank you for that opportunity.
Yes.
So I really wanted like a super beautiful steam seat that would, what I started calling meet my living room test. So I wanted to make something that I could have in my living room and not evoke a strange reaction from somebody who came into it. And I've been in this wonderful world of women's health and wellness for a long time. So it wasn't really a taboo thing. It was just I just want to have something that fits naturally into the aesthetic of my home. And at the time we were living in a smaller place. Now we're in this refurbished sort of meandering farmhouse. So there's plenty of room for steam seats, but I also spent many years in my 20s in a little studio apartment. And so I'm have a strong affinity to people who need to have everything be both beautiful and utilized at all times. And so I landed in Maine, where my partner, husband, and I moved 2 years ago, having already reached out to some woodworking teachers to see if they could be in partnership with me as I designed something. And I found this wonderful, wonderful man about an hour north of us. And he had a bed and breakfast, and my husband and I spent our second night in Maine at his bed and breakfast. And we woke up that morning, and he had known that I wanted to talk to him about a woodworking project. And I will say I was a little nervous. In all of these years, I've tended toward I'm just going to talk about what I like to talk about. But if it's interesting and people have questions, I love to continue talking about solo sex for healing and Yoni steaming and all the great things that excite me in the world. But I'm not in the spirit of making people uncomfortable for the sake of whatever that would be, And so I had that point of how will I navigate this? Well, that was all my own fears, because I started describing to my now woodworking teacher what I wanted to create, and he instantly understood it. And he had such great support for it, and was telling me about his stepdaughter who's a nurse and how many menstrual ailments she works with and nursing, and how he totally understood how it could be supportive and wanted to be in consideration of how the wood could be coated so that it could be protected from the water. And we just dove right in. And so for a couple of months, I would go up there and we'd spend the day together trying to discern what types of wood we wanted to use and what the lid seat should look like, so that it was both highly effective, but didn't sort of signify, is there an indoor toilet in the room, which wouldn't have passed my living room test. And so a couple months later, we came up, which is what is now the original Katara sauna for our vaginal steaming. And we've been making iterations and updates to it with design ever since, but that was in 2019.
Wow. Is he still the one making them?
So he and I made the first 12 units ourselves. And I'm so excited. I'm getting all these tingles. I'm actually going up to thank him and to take him out to lunch next week, which I'm so excited about. But what happened is that I made 12, and this was 2 years ago. So on my 38th birthday, I sent an email out to 38 women, and I said, here's what I've been up to, and I'm really curious if any of you would like to buy these. And it was really me sort of testing out the market and seeing if I was onto something or not. And in 24 hours, all of those 12 units were sold. And I thought, oh my gosh, I actually need to start figuring out a way to make more of these than he and I can make on our own. And a couple months later, partnered with a woman who lives just 55 minutes west of me, who has a woodworking studio, and she and her team now make all of our steam seats. And just within the week, we've now sold 1,000 steam seats. to 10 countries and 46 states. So I emailed my teacher and said, we got to celebrate. I'm coming up to take you out to lunch and give you the biggest hug ever. So that's really fun. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And I don't know if you know this, but I got into woodworking last year. And my partner and I built like a full body sauna. And
I did see that. I am so inspired, and I want you to tell me how to do that on our land.
Oh my goodness. It was a journey. It took like 4 months, and I learned all kinds of things I never thought I would learn, like using a power saw. And but I felt really empowered, like buying all my tools. And now I have a tool shed. And
it's so fun, and I love it. I love my safety goggles and my whole sort of outfit and everything that I was able to learn. So yeah, it's really fun.
Oh, that's so special. And I think you mentioned in the email that we could maybe have like a discount for our audience if they wanted to buy a seat. Yes. So we'll include that.
Absolutely. Yeah. If Rising Love works for you, great. Then that can be good. And that way, go to Katara Love, and on any Steam seat, it takes $10 off, and that includes our saving bundles and everything. So
cool. Thank you. Yes, we'll set that up, and it'll be in the show notes too. So, yeah, beautiful. Okay, so I want to ask you about. See, where do I want to go next? I think the idea of being such a creative person and trusting your creative urges to create a business, just how has that journey been for you of just being an entrepreneur and having intuitive nudges and knowing when to listen to them? And then also just the fears that come up along the way of like, am I really doing this? Is this gonna like totally fail? What has that journey been for you? And
it has been a absolutely beautiful one. And I stand by that, but some really big challenges, your darkest challenges can have beauty to them. Right. And so it has absolutely included the darkest nights of my soul. And I think this is a theme with many women entrepreneurs, is that the creative projects that we're invited in to do are also what are needed for us to heal. And so the journey has truly been a healing one for me. The ways in which I was called to work with sexuality brought me into an understanding of my own trauma in deeper levels, and ways in which I was in avoidance of it, and ways in which those patternings couldn't go on any longer. And I had to face that and look at my numbing tendencies in ways that needed to be addressed, because not only were my life and my well-being was at risk, but somehow when you also have your business at risk, it is that much more exaggerated in its need. And that can be really intimidating and really challenging. And I'm so grateful to the sisters in my life who have held me through all of it, the really challenging times as well as the celebrations. And I think with each project I've done, I've come to see, certainly with Kitara, and now in hindsight with Actually too, that there is a surrender to the entity that is asking to be created. And I really pragmatically, but then also really spiritually believe that these are live creations and that we are in relationship with them. And when I forget that is when I have the hardest time. But when I can be in relationship, in trusting relationship, that's when things can unfold. And it's not that it's always the messages that you want to receive. that come through. But when you're in relationship with the entities, it's like that relationship with your intuition. My intuition is often telling me to do things that I do not want to do. They're really challenging to do or total pain to do. And yet there is a heart, a soul, a womb space knowing that that's the only way forward. And so with creations, I feel that as well. I think that one of the big, big lessons for Katara, and I felt it in this conversation, is, we're talking about the release of stagnation and letting go. And I had to let go of a lot in order to start Kitara. I had to let go of an identity attached to a different business. I had to let go of, oh my gosh, so much. I had to let go of a lot of identity I had around trauma, around different stories that I was telling myself. And all of that was beautifully in service of something that was able to hold me in a deeper way. But I didn't know that then. That was a big leap of faith. And the other thing that I find can be most challenging, and that is something that I think years and years of entrepreneurship has allowed me to build some resilience around, but it's always there, that most people do not live in the way that we're talking about living. And so they can love you, but they're not necessarily going to understand why you're taking what is perceived to them as unnecessary risk in your life. And that's where my relationship with myself and my own body and my own knowing is just so important to nurture, because it holds me strong and it holds me steady through being around other people's nervousness. And that nervousness comes with so much love, but it can also feel really overwhelming at the times where, if I'm going to take it on, I need to just hold it rather than actually let it really inside me.
Mm-hmm. That's a big journey. There's a lot of, you spoke to it beautifully, of just like, this is a healing journey and having a business. And there are times when we need to let go. There are times when we need to be courageous. There are times when we need to put ourselves out there. There are times when we feel like we're not going to fit in, and people are going to reject us, and we're going to fail, and all of it. We face that. And can be exhausting sometimes, but there are also those really amazing wins and moments and emails that come in when it's like you find out you really helped someone. And
I got a handwritten card.
Oh, yay.
It was just like, I don't know if people know the power of an email or a handwritten card. It's like just so incredibly wonderful. And so worthy of celebration, and the journey, it can be incredibly challenging. So yes, I am always here for supporting others who are on it, because it is quite something to put yourself out there and to put these creations that feel so needed for you out in the world, and you really get it and you know why they matter. And sometimes the timing of that, certainly for me, has not matched where the culture was at. And so trying to navigate that can be a lot.
Yes. Yeah. I want to ask you about just the journey to finding your true self and those true things that bring you joy and excitement and fulfillment. And it sounds like you came from a pretty academic background, and I grew up on the East Coast, and so did I. So I understand like the whole academic, intellectual, achievement-oriented productivity, all of it, to find your way into something completely different. And I want to hear a little bit more about that journey too.
Yeah, thank you. I am still on that journey. So I want to name that. I was just on a walk before this lovely conversation and feeling more deeply into this pattern that I've been noticing about my husband asking me, how was your day? and me responding with what I did. And that's really representative of a lot of the work that I'm doing now, of finding myself in these patterns of needing to justify what I've done with some sort of connection to how it correlated into something productive. So even at times in my life, I mean, I've seen the irony. There was a lot of it in the sexuality space that I was in and am in, that is around, well, you can use orgasm for, it's, guys, it's productive. It's productive. It has healing powers, and and yes, it does. And I believe that, and I'm so grateful for it. And also I came to a place of some chuckle around how that was its journey. Like, I'm glad it invited me to see that productive side of this cosmic life force energy. But underneath that is a little, I think, cosmic giggle with me around how you're taking this beautiful, powerful, boundless creative energy and honestly reducing it to something that has a very linear output to it. And so, yeah, it's been one of a lot of reflection and curiosity and inquiry around how I can let this death grip on productivity soften or let go. But it's my upbringing. Everything was about getting the great grade or being the best on the lacrosse field or, getting the leadership position in the club or the organization. And that served me very well in many ways. But it also has definitely been a journey to allow myself to be in a space that isn't attached to an outcome.
Wow.
And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you struggle at all with perfectionism or being hard on yourself, or does that come up in your life?
Hard on myself is I just, sometimes I can get hard on myself for being hard on myself,
Yes.
I can't take it anymore. And so thankfully, I mean, I'm married to somebody who is so unconditionally loving and can hold this look on his face of just such confusion when I'm being so hard on myself. And I, in those moments, tend to feel really justified in why I'm being so hard on myself. And so expecting somebody to agree with me, agree with a horrible person because, somebody got their sauna 2 days later than I said they were going to, and they're actually fine with it, but I'm carrying this should around, it means something about myself and my identity, and more robust things than that, I'm sure. But he's just able to have this look of confusion and sometimes deep sadness. And I feel in that I can see the parts of me that have felt so beaten up because they've been beaten up by me. I have versions of myself, my little girl self, who I once saw in a meditation with all these bruises on her. And they were bruises I had inflicted upon her, and saying that she wasn't good enough or she was too much, both sides of that coin, but over and over again. And the other truth of that was that she was so loving, that unconditional love. But that also I had been evoking a lot of pain on her and therefore us.
Wow. Yeah. What do you feel like has helped you most or helps you most now when you do catch those thought patterns coming in?
The consciousness around them themselves, conversations like this, which make it okay to name, are really powerful. So thank you. And again, my husband has been such a wonderful support, and just, again, showcasing to me how out of whack that is from his sense of reality. And then there is really something around just coming to be okay with, this is it's still a knot in my stomach just to say this, but disappointment is the word. If somebody really wants to hurt me, they can say I disappointed them.
Mm.
And so just really trying to say, like, I might have disappointed somebody, but I can honor that. I can hold that. I can take responsibility if it's mine to take. And it doesn't mean anything against my essence. Like, my essence is who I am, and it is pure and good and doing her best.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, self-compassion. We should really learn that in school.
Oh my gosh, if only self-compassion. It's the whole gig. And truly, when we can be that compassion for ourselves, it reverberates. And, I look to the people I admire and that inspire me in how to live, and they have so much self-compassion. We're not drawn to people who are full of judging themselves, right? Because that judgment that they're putting inward probably has an outward expression, and vice versa. So it's very affirming to be continually swirling around the self-compassion in our own entities, but then be connecting to others who are on that work too, because then you get to feel their waves of compassion reverberating out. So I've been so fortunate to have so many people who have shown that to me on my journey.
Yes. Yes. And any last words of wisdom, or for any women out there who are struggling or maybe feeling unfulfilled, or maybe in that darker, messier part of their life, and they're just like, I don't know what's next, and are searching for answers, and any thoughts or wisdom you have for those people?
You are not alone. You are so not alone. And there is a path out of what you're feeling right now. Even if your mind is doing a really good job at convincing you that that's not the case. And my invitation would be to consider the body, to take time to be present with your body, whether that's 10 minutes of stillness, 10 minutes of sitting in the bath with no technology, 10 minutes of breathing. But if you can, hold a hand on your heart and hold a hand on your womb space and breathe. She has messages for you.
So beautiful. Yeah. Well, I think I'd love to just take that in with everyone for a moment. Just breathe it in. Just bring it into our body, into our heart. Just feeling the gratitude for all the gems of wisdom that have come through in this conversation today. The path that you have walked, Kit, to be where you are today, to be a guiding light, one who has done that inner work and faced some of those harder parts, and to find that inner love, and to know that none of us are perfect, but we're all doing our best. I just want to leave everyone with that, to find that little gem within themselves of just the essence that they're here to bring, and that they are so much more than the achievements or the expectations or anything else that is coming from the outside world. So, with many blessings and a deep bow, namaste. Thank you, Kit. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to our show today. We would love to hear what you think. Take a moment to hop on over to iTunes and leave us a review. We'd be so grateful to receive it. Until next time, namaste.